Welcome to your deep dive. We've got some really fascinating material to dig into today.
Yeah.
It's Henry Makow's work on the Illuminati.
Oh, yeah.
You've provided excerpts from his book.
Right.
And some audio lectures, too, all focused on this idea.
Okay.
And it's a pretty intriguing one.
Yeah.
But also, let's be honest, a little bit controversial.
It is controversial, yeah.
We're dealing with some pretty heavy claims here.
Right.
Talking about secret societies, global manipulation,
Mm.
even a potential shadow government controlling everything from behind the scenes.
Yeah, it really makes you question everything you thought you knew about how the world works.
Exactly. We're diving deep into the world of conspiracy theories.
Right.
So where do we even begin with something like this?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is understand Makow's core argument.
Okay.
Who are the Illuminatis and what are they trying to achieve?
Okay, so let's unpack that.
Right.
Who are these Illuminati folks in Makow's view?
So Makow describes them as an incredibly powerful and wealthy group.
Okay.
Essentially, it's a satanic cult of bankers who control a vast network of cartels.
Like,
We're talking about everything.
give us some examples.
Banking, oil, pharmaceuticals,
Right.
even the media.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's not just about money for them.
No, it sounds like there's a much bigger objective at play here.
Right. According to Makow, their goal is much grander. They want total control over society and government,
Really?
shaping the world according to their own agenda.
So how do they achieve this control? What tools are they using?
Well, Makow argues they use a variety of methods to exert their influence.
Okay.
He says they infiltrate organizations,
Uh-huh.
manipulate the media, even control what we learn in school.
Really?
Yeah, and he even goes so far as to claim that they orchestrate war
Oh.
to gain power and wealth,
Oh, wow.
all to bring about their ultimate goal,
Yeah.
a totalitarian world government.
Wow. That's a pretty bleak picture he's painting.
It is, yeah.
So he's basically saying that nothing is as it appears.
Yeah.
Everything we see is just a facade.
Exactly. And to support his claims,
Okay.
Makow provides a number of historical examples
Okay.
and points to specific figures he believes played key roles in this grand conspiracy.
Let's get into some specifics.
Okay.
One of the biggest events that Makow focuses on is World War II. He makes some pretty shocking claims about how that war was orchestrated.
He does?
What's his take on that?
Well, Makow argues that World War II
Sure.
was carefully orchestrated by the Illuminati to advance their agenda.
But how does he back that up? That seems like a huge claim to make.
It is, but he points to a variety of evidence,
Hey.
including a document called the Colonel House Report.
Okay.
This Colonel House was a close advisor to President Woodrow Wilson,
Right.
and in this report, he supposedly details America's peaceful return to the British crown.
So he's saying America was essentially becoming a British colony again.
That's Makow's interpretation, yes.
Wow.
He argues that the Illuminatis were manipulating events behind the scenes,
Okay.
using both world wars to further consolidate their power and move closer to their goal of global domination.
It's a pretty intense theory.
It is.
And speaking of World War II, he also makes some really interesting,
Right.
and I'd say controversial claims about Adolf Hitler.
Uh-huh.
What's Makow's take on Hitler's role in all of this?
Well, Makow doesn't see Hitler as this mastermind
Yeah.
that we often imagine him to be.
Right.
Instead, he paints him as a pawn,
Okay.
a tool used by the Illuminati to achieve their own ends.
So he's basically saying that Hitler was manipulated by this hidden force.
Right.
But Hitler was a dictator. He had a lot of power.
Right.
How could he be controlled by someone else?
That's a great question, and Makow acknowledges Hitler's power,
Yeah.
but suggests that his rise to power, his financial backing,
Okay.
even some of his seemingly illogical military decisions
Mm-hmm.
were all part of a larger plan orchestrated by the Illuminati. He even goes so far as to suggest that Hitler might have been a Rothschild descendant.
The Rothschilds, the powerful bankers that he claims, are at the head of the Illuminati.
Exactly.
So he's saying Hitler was potentially working for them.
That's the implication.
Wow.
And to support this claim,
Okay.
Makow cites several sources,
Okay.
including an essay called I Was Hitler's Boss
I was Hitler's boss.
by Captain Karl May.
Okay.
In this essay, Hitler is depicted as a weak and easily manipulated figure,
Really?
controlled by those pulling the strings behind the scenes.
So even figures that we consider to be powerful and independent
Right.
were ultimately just pawns in the Illuminati's game.
That's what Makow is arguing.
Makes you wonder
Yeah.
if Hitler was allegedly being manipulated.
Uh-huh.
What about other major players in World War II?
Right.
Like Winston Churchill.
Well, that's where things get even more controversial.
Okay.
Makow actually challenges Churchill's heroic image,
Really?
arguing that he too was a pawn of the Illuminati. He points to Churchill's family connection to the Rothschilds
Oh, okay.
and suggests that his actions during the war, including his eagerness for conflict and his decision to bomb civilian targets,
Oh.
were all part of a larger plan orchestrated by this hidden elite.
So he's turning the narrative on its head and making the good guys seem like part of the problem.
Right.
That's a pretty radical reinterpretation of history.
It is, and it doesn't stop there.
It doesn't.
Makow also casts doubt on the role of other prominent figures,
Okay.
including Lester Pearson.
Okay, remind me, who's Lester Pearson?
Pearson later became Prime Minister of Canada,
Okay, right.
but at the time, he was serving as a Canadian diplomat.
Okay.
And Makow claims that Pearson
Yeah.
was providing confidential information to Russian intelligence.
So he's saying that Pearson was essentially a spy for the Russians?
That's what Makow's alleging.
Wow.
Yeah, and he ties this alleged treason back to the Illuminati,
Okay.
portraying Pearson as part of a network of agents
Right.
working to advance their agenda.
It's incredible how he weaves this web of connections,
It is, yeah.
bringing in figures that you wouldn't necessarily associate with a global conspiracy.
Right.
And he doesn't just stop with political leaders, does he?
No, he doesn't.
He brings in other figures, like Martin Bormann,
Bormann, yeah.
who was Hitler's right-hand man.
All right.
Makow suggests that Bormann was actually a Soviet agent.
Tasked with undermining the German war effort and ensuring Germany's defeat.
So even within the Nazi regime,
Yeah.
Makow sees these double agents working against their own side,
Exactly.
furthering the Illuminati's agenda.
That's right.
That's crazy.
He points to Bormann's actions during the war,
Okay.
particularly his alleged role in sabotaging the German war effort
Right.
and facilitating the Holocaust,
Wow.
as evidence of his true allegiance. He even suggests that Bormann's escape from punishment after the war was part of the plan.
So he's saying that no one is who they seem. Everyone is playing a part in this grand scheme orchestrated by the Illuminati.
Right.
It makes you wonder if there's anyone we can trust.
That's a good question.
And it leads us to another fascinating element of Makow's work,
Okay.
his exploration of a figure known as Hidden Hand.
Hidden Hand, yeah.
Okay, so who is this Hidden Hand?
Okay, so Hidden Hand is someone claiming to be an Illuminati insider.
An Illuminati insider.
They participated in online forums
Okay.
and supposedly revealed the Illuminati's plans for world domination.
Wait, someone just admitted to being part of the Illuminati online?
That's what they claim, yeah.
And what kind of things did they reveal?
Well, Hidden Hand described their plans to create widespread chaos and negativity
Okay.
as a way to manipulate humanity
Uh-huh.
and, as they put it, harvest souls.
Harvest souls, what does that even mean?
Well, Makow uses this as an example of how the Illuminati disguise their evil intentions
Right.
behind what seems to be spirituality.
So they're using our beliefs and desires against us.
That's pretty sneaky.
It is, and it's effective if you believe Makow's theories.
Right.
What Hidden Hand reveals paints a really chilling picture of what the Illuminati are capable of.
Uh-huh.
This manipulation on such a grand scale makes you question how much control we really have over our own lives.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
It definitely raises some big questions.
It does.
If powerful groups like the Illuminati are
Yeah.
manipulating events on a global scale,
Right.
what does that mean for us?
Yeah.
Do we have any agency? Is democracy even real?
Those are exactly the questions that Makow wants us to grapple with.
Well,
He's challenging us to think critically about the world around us,
uh-huh.
to question the narratives we're given,
Okay.
and to consider the possibility that things are not as they seem.
Okay, so he's laid out this pretty wild theory about the Illuminati
Right.
and their control over global events. He's provided some examples, some historical figures, and even this supposed insider testimony from Hidden Hand.
Right. But how does he specifically address the Jewish community and Zionism?
Okay.
That's a big part of his work, right?
It is, and this is where things get even more controversial.
Okay.
Makow dives into how the Illuminati, according to his theory,
Uh-huh.
have used Jewish people, particularly through the Zionist movement,
Okay.
to further their agenda.
Can you give us some specifics? What are some of his main points there?
Sure. One example he uses is the treatment of Iraqi Jews.
Okay.
He claims they were mistreated and manipulated into fleeing to Israel,
Okay.
serving the Zionist goal as a Jewish state,
Right.
but ultimately losing their wealth and cultural identity in the process.
So he's suggesting that even within the Jewish community,
Right.
there's this manipulation and exploitation taking place.
Yes, and he makes a similar argument about the Holocaust.
The Holocaust.
He acknowledges the horrific atrocities committed against Jewish people,
Right.
but he also suggests that Zionists might bear some responsibility for what happened.
That's a heavy accusation. What's the basis for that claim?
Well, he brings up a story about Rabbi Michael Dov Weissmandl,
Okay.
who was trying to negotiate with the Nazis to stop the transports to concentration camps.
Right.
Makow claims that Zionist leaders turned a deaf ear to pleas for help,
Really?
prioritizing the establishment of Israel,
Wow.
even if it meant sacrificing Jewish lives.
That's a really controversial claim.
It is.
But he doesn't just focus on Zionism, right?
He doesn't.
He also talks about these false flag operations
Right.
that supposedly play a big part in the Illuminati's plans.
Hmm.
Can you explain what he means by that?
Sure. A false flag attack is when a group stages an attack
Okay.
and makes it look like another group is responsible.
Okay.
Makow claims that this is a common tactic used by the Illuminati
Right.
to manipulate public opinion
Uh-huh.
and create the conditions for war or social unrest.
So he's basically saying that they create problems
Yeah.
so they can offer solutions that benefit their agenda.
Exactly.
That's pretty devious.
It is.
What are some of the events that he cites as potential false flags?
Well, he mentions several,
Okay.
including the bombing of American establishments in Cairo in 1954,
Okay.
the attack on the USS Liberty in 1967,
Right.
and he even suggests that the 9/11 attacks might fall into this category.
Whoa, hold on. He's saying 9/11 might have been orchestrated by the Illuminati?
He doesn't explicitly state that,
Okay.
but he does allude to the possibility
Okay.
that it was a false flag operation designed to further their agenda.
So we're seeing a pattern here.
Yeah.
Makow takes these major historical events
Right.
and reinterprets them through the lens of his Illuminati theory, suggesting that they were manipulated
Yeah.
or even orchestrated to advance their agenda.
Exactly.
It's he's really painting a picture of a world where nothing is what it seems.
He is.
Okay, so that's a lot to digest already.
Yeah, it is a lot.
But we've got more to unpack, right?
We do. Yeah, he doesn't stop there.
Okay.
He goes even further by exploring the lives.
Yeah.
And alleged connections of several other historical figures he believes
Okay.
were either victims or pawns of the Illuminati.
Give us some names. Who does he focus on?
Well, he delves into the story of Captain William Morgan,
Captain William Morgan, okay.
who was a Freemason who was murdered in 1826.
A Freemason murdered? What happened?
Well, Makow suggests that this was an act of the Illuminati
Okay.
to silence him for attempting to expose their secrets.
So it's not just about manipulating global events.
Right.
It's about silencing anyone who tries to expose the truth.
Exactly. That's a key part of his argument.
That's pretty frightening.
It is, yeah.
And he also makes some pretty startling claims about several U.S. presidents.
He does.
Okay, what's the story there?
He alleges that 2 U.S. presidents,
Okay.
William Henry Harrison and Zachary Taylor,
Right.
were both poisoned and killed by the Illuminati.
So he's saying they were assassinated.
That's his claim, yeah.
Wow.
Because they were obstructing their plans.
And-
He claims that they were both opposed to the creation of a central bank in the United States,
Okay.
which Makow argues is a key goal of the Illuminati.
So to control the financial system.
Exactly.
Wow.
And he doesn't stop there.
he doesn't.
He goes on to suggest that several other presidents,
Okay.
including James Garfield, William McKinley, and John F. Kennedy,
Some of the most famous presidents who were assassinated.
exactly,
Wow.
were also assassinated by the Illuminati for similar reasons.
For opposing their agenda.
Exactly.
He's basically saying that the Illuminati have infiltrated the highest levels of American government
Right.
and are willing to use violence
Yeah.
to eliminate anyone who stands in their way.
That's a central part of his theory, and he ties a lot of these alleged assassinations to a specific group,
Oh.
the Skull and Bones Society at Yale University.
Ah, Skull and Bones, that super secret society.
Exactly.
It's always surrounded by rumors and conspiracy theories.
It is.
What's Makow's take on them?
He claims that the Skull and Bones, which is also known as the Brotherhood of Death.
Brotherhood of Death. That sounds pretty ominous.
It does, yeah.
No.
He claims that they are an assassination arm of the Illuminati,
Wow.
taking out any U.S. politicians who oppose the Rothschilds' plans for global domination.
He keeps tying things back to the Rothschilds.
He does.
It seems like they play a pretty central role in Makow's worldview.
Absolutely. He positions them as the head of this global banking cartel
Right.
that pulls the strings behind the scenes,
Yeah.
controlling governments, manipulating economies, and orchestrating wars.
To achieve their ultimate goal of world domination.
Exactly.
He even claims they control oil not just for profit,
Right.
but as a tool to control nations and manipulate global events.
Exactly.
Oh.
He argues that by controlling the supply and price of oil,
Okay.
the Illuminati can dictate the actions of entire countries.
Hmm.
And he uses this control of oil to explain events like the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan,
Okay.
arguing that they are part of a larger plan to gain control of Middle Eastern oil reserves
Right.
and further consolidate their power.
He also talks about a plot to overthrow President Franklin Delano Roosevelt
He does, yeah.
back in 1933.
The so-called business plot.
The business plot, I'm not familiar with this.
It was a supposed plot
Okay.
that involved a group of wealthy American businessmen
Right.
who wanted to remove FDR from office
Okay.
and install a fascist dictator in his place.
It sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood movie.
It does, doesn't it?
What's Makow's take on this alleged plot?
Well, he actually challenges the conventional narrative of this event.
How so?
He suggests that the entire plot was a staged event
Staged.
designed to give FDR more credibility
Really?
and paint him as an enemy of Wall Street,
Okay.
even though he was supposedly in league with the Illuminati all along.
Wait, so he's saying that even events that appear to challenge the established power structure
Yeah.
could actually be part of the Illuminati's plan. It's all about manipulating perceptions, even making it look like there's resistance when there really isn't.
Exactly. That's a key part of his theory.
That's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
It is.
What's the evidence he uses to support this claim about the business plot being staged?
Well, he argues that the supposed conspirators
Okay.
approached a retired Major General, Smedley Butler,
Okay.
to lead their coup.
Uh-huh.
Makow points out that this was a bizarre choice,
Why?
given Butler's outspoken opposition to fascism and Wall Street.
So it seems like an odd choice if they were serious about overthrowing the government.
It does, yeah.
Almost feels like they wanted to get caught.
That's Makow's point.
Okay.
He sees it as a deliberate attempt to create a spectacle
Okay.
that would ultimately benefit FDR,
Okay.
even though he was allegedly a member of the Illuminati himself.
And he also seems to question FDR's sincerity in opposing the bankers.
He does.
Yeah.
He claims that FDR came from a long line of elite families
Okay.
tied to the Rothschilds, and that his opposition to Wall Street was just an act.
So even someone like FDR, who is often seen as a champion of the common man,
Right.
was secretly working for the Illuminati.
That's what Makow suggests.
It's a pretty unsettling picture he paints.
Is, yeah.
So we've talked about the Rothschilds a lot,
Yeah,
and it seems like they're a key part of his theory.
they are.
But he also talks about Victor Rothschild specifically,
Right.
who was a member of that incredibly wealthy banking family.
Mm-hmm.
What was his role in all of this?
Well, Makow drops a real bombshell here.
Okay.
He claims that Victor Rothschild was a Soviet agent.
Wait, a Rothschild working for the communists?
Yeah.
That seems totally counterintuitive.
It does.
Weren't they supposed to be the epitome of capitalism and global finance?
Right, but Makow uses this as evidence
Okay.
that the Illuminati are using both communism and fascism to achieve their goals.
So it's not about ideology for them.
Yeah.
It's about power.
It's about power, pure and simple.
Wow. What kind of evidence does he offer to support this claim about Rothschild being a Soviet agent?
Well, he mentions a book called The Fifth Man by Roland Perry,
Okay.
which details the story of a Soviet spy ring
Uh-huh.
operating within British intelligence.
Okay.
This book, along with testimony from former KGB agents,
Okay.
supposedly confirms Rothschild's involvement in passing secrets to the Soviets.
So he's drawing on multiple sources to build his case.
He is.
But even if Rothschild was a Soviet agent,
Yeah.
how does that tie back to the Illuminati?
Well, Makow sees it as further evidence that the Illuminati are playing both sides of the game,
Okay.
manipulating governments and ideologies to create conflict and chaos,
Right.
ultimately advancing their agenda of global control.
It's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
It is.
He's basically saying that what we see as these big global conflicts are really just staged events manipulated by a hidden elite to achieve their own ends.
Exactly.
And he uses a number of historical examples to support this claim, including the story of a Polish war leader who was assassinated after uncovering evidence of a Soviet massacre.
Right.
Makow argues that Rothschild played a role in covering up this assassination to protect the Illuminati's interests.
Wow.
So he's not just talking about manipulating events.
Right.
He's also claiming they're willing to use violence and intimidation to silence those who threaten their power.
It seems like they'll stop at nothing.
It does, yeah.
He also claims that Lord Halifax,
Halifax,
a prominent British politician, was actually a Soviet asset.
Working to appease Hitler and push him into a two-front war.
Wait, so the British were deliberately trying to provoke a war with Germany?
That's what Makow suggests.
But why would they want a war? Wouldn't that be incredibly destructive and costly?
Well, according to Makow, the Illuminati thrive on chaos and conflict. They use war to consolidate power, to eliminate their enemies, and to create the conditions for a new world order.
So they see war as a tool. A way to reshape the world according to their own agenda.
That's a pretty dark view of things.
It is.
He argues that World War II was a prime example of this strategy in action. He claims that the entire drama surrounding the war, with Britain standing as the defender of freedom, was a charade.
He's basically saying that what we think we know about World War II is a lie. He's suggesting that the real story is much more complex and sinister than the narrative we've been told. He argues that the Illuminati controlled both sides of the conflict.
Both sides.
Using the war to achieve their own objectives.
Wow.
Which included the destruction of Germany.
That's a pretty radical reinterpretation of history.
It is, and he goes on to discuss how American intervention in World War II was also manipulated by the Illuminati.
So even though America was supposedly fighting for freedom and democracy, Makow is saying that they were being used by this hidden force?
That's his argument. He claims that figures like Wendell Willkie, who ran for president against FDR in 1940, were actually part of a British effort to draw America into the war.
So American politicians were being influenced by foreign powers.
That's what Makow suggests.
Even those supposedly working for the Illuminati.
That's right.
So the decision for America to enter the war was not made independently, but was influenced by these shadowy forces working behind the scenes.
That's his argument.
He's basically saying that American democracy was undermined by these foreign interests.
He is.
That's a pretty bold claim.
It is.
What evidence does he use to support this?
Well, he claims that figures like Willkie were financed and supported by British intelligence to push for American involvement. And he also points to the role of the American media.
The media? How were they involved?
He claims that the media played a key role in this manipulation. Using propaganda and biased reporting to sway public opinion in favor of war.
So it's about controlling the narrative, shaping how people perceive events, and creating a climate of fear and outrage that can be used to justify war.
Exactly. Makow argues that this is a key tactic used by the Illuminati to manipulate public opinion and achieve their objectives.
So it's not just about controlling governments. It's about controlling the information that people have access to.
That's right.
So they can make their own decisions.
Or rather, not make their own decisions. Be manipulated into making the decisions that the Illuminati want them to make. And he doesn't just focus on politicians and the media. He also talks about these so-called grassroots organizations that were supposedly advocating for war under the guise of promoting democracy and human rights.
What's the story with these organizations? How are they involved?
Makow claims that groups like the Friends of Democracy and the Fight for Freedom Committee were actually fronts for British intelligence.
Really?
Using their seemingly noble goals to manipulate public opinion. And pressure politicians into supporting the war effort.
So it's about creating the illusion of popular support for a war that was actually being orchestrated by a small group of powerful individuals.
Exactly. Makow sees this as a prime example of how the Illuminati used deception and manipulation to achieve their goals.
Wow, this is all pretty mind-blowing.
It is, yeah.
He's basically saying that nothing is what it seems.
Right.
That we're constantly being manipulated and deceived, and that there's this hidden hand guiding events on a global scale.
Exactly.
Are there any more examples of how they allegedly pulled this off?
Well, he provides some pretty bold examples of how British intelligence manipulated events to draw America into the war.
Like what?
Like manufacturing fake photos of German atrocity.
Fake photos?
Yeah.
Okay.
Even creating a phony map.
A phony map?
That supposedly showed a Nazi plan to invade South America.
Really?
All of this, he argues, was designed to stir up public outrage.
Okay.
And create a pretext for war.
It sounds like something out of a spy novel.
It does, yeah.
But if that's true, it really makes you question how much of what we believe about history is based on fact and how much is based on carefully constructed propaganda.
That's exactly the point Makow is trying to make.
Yeah.
He wants us to question everything we've been told and to start thinking critically about the forces that shape our world.
Okay.
And he sees a clear connection between the British intelligence services and Zionist interests, claiming that they work together to bring about American intervention.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. He argues that British and Zionist interests were aligned in wanting America to enter the war.
Okay.
He uses the example of the Overseas News Agency, which he claims was financed by both British intelligence and Zionist groups.
Okay.
To publicize the persecution of Jews and generate sympathy for their cause, which could ultimately be used to justify going to war.
So he's suggesting that the suffering of one group was being exploited to advance a larger geopolitical strategy.
Exactly.
Wow.
He sees this as a recurring pattern throughout history, where the Illuminati exploit tragedies and manipulate public opinion to achieve their objectives.
So bringing it back to the individual level, he's saying that our emotions are being used against us to get us to support wars that we might not otherwise support.
That's right.
He even claims that Soviet intelligence was also involved in this effort, working alongside the British and Zionist groups to influence American policy.
Yes. He claims that the Soviets also had an interest in drawing America into the war.
Okay.
And that they worked with the other groups to achieve that goal.
Wow.
And he bases this claim on decoded messages between the Soviet embassy and Moscow, which he argues reveal the extent of their involvement in these covert operations.
It's like he's weaving together this incredibly complex web of connections and conspiracies.
He is.
With all these different players working towards a common goal, even if they weren't aware of it.
Exactly.
So it's like this grand puppet show.
Right.
And we're all just puppets dancing on the strings.
That's right.
Wow. He also mentions a document that supposedly provides a different perspective on Hitler's rise to power.
He does, yeah.
What's the story with that?
He brings up a document written by Captain Karl May called I Was Hitler's Boss.
Okay, I Was Hitler's Boss.
Which portrays Hitler as a weak and easily manipulated figure.
So it challenges the traditional image of Hitler as this all-powerful dictator.
It does.
What does this document say about Hitler?
Well, in this document, which was published just before America's entry into the war, Hitler is depicted as a lost soul. Desperately seeking purpose and belonging. Easily swayed by those who recognized his potential as a charismatic leader.
So instead of being a mastermind, he was more of a puppet.
Yeah.
A tool used by others to achieve their own goals.
That's what this document suggests.
And Makow seems to find it credible.
He does. He uses it to support his claim that Hitler was chosen by a group of German industrialists and military leaders who were looking for a figurehead to lead their movement.
He describes these figures as being like Hollywood scouts.
He does.
Seeking out the right talent to embody their vision of a powerful Germany.
Yeah, it's a pretty unsettling image.
It is. It strips away the myth of Hitler as this all-powerful, independent dictator, portraying him as a pawn in a larger game.
Exactly.
He also talks about how Hitler's program was carefully crafted to appeal to the desires of the masses, exploiting their fears and prejudices to gain support.
He does. He points to the scapegoating of Jews as a prime example. Claiming that Hitler and his backers recognized the deep-seated anti-Semitism within German society and used it to their advantage.
So it's about manipulating existing social divisions and anxieties to gain power.
Exactly.
That's pretty cynical.
It is. But Makow argues that this is a common tactic used by those in power throughout history to control and manipulate the masses.
He even claims that Hitler never actually wrote Mein Kampf.
He does. He suggests that the book was actually ghostwritten by others.
Okay.
With Hitler's name attached to it for propaganda purposes.
So even the most famous writings attributed to him might not actually be his own.
Right.
That's a pretty bold claim.
It is.
And one that really challenges the very foundation of how we understand Hitler's ideology and motivations.
Exactly. He's suggesting that we need to look beyond the surface.
Okay.
To question the narratives we've been given.
Right.
And to consider the possibility that things are not as they appear.
He even claims that Hitler was never really in control of the Nazi Party.
Yeah.
But was manipulated by figures like Hermann Goering, who held the true power.
Right. He portrays Goering as a cunning and ruthless manipulator, orchestrating events like the burning of the Reichstag and the Night of the Long Knives.
Okay.
To consolidate his own power and eliminate his rivals.
Wow. So even within the Nazi regime, Makow sees this internal struggle for power.
He does.
With Hitler merely a puppet in the hands of those pulling the strings.
Right.
It's a complex and disturbing view of history.
It is.
Challenging us to rethink our understanding of these figures and their motivations.
Exactly. Makow is asking us to look beyond the surface.
Okay.
To question the narratives we've been given.
Yeah.
And to consider the possibility that history is not as straightforward as it seems.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
World War II, Hitler, Churchill, Pearson, Bormann.
Right.
It's a lot to process.
It is a lot to process, yeah.
Are there any more key figures that Makow highlights in his work?
He also explores an alternative perspective on Hitler.
Okay.
Drawing on the work of author Greg Hallett.
Greg Hallett, okay.
Who makes some pretty wild claims about Hitler.
Okay, what's Hallett's main argument?
Hallett argues that Hitler was actually a British agent.
A British agent?
Trained by British intelligence and used to further their agenda.
A British agent? That seems pretty far-fetched.
It does.
What evidence does he use to support that claim?
Well, Hallett uses several pieces of evidence.
Okay.
For example, he claims that Hitler spent time in England in the years leading up to World War I.
Okay.
Undergoing training at a British military school.
That's a little-known fact.
It is, and it challenges the conventional narrative of Hitler as a purely German phenomenon.
What other evidence does Hallett use?
He points to events during World War II.
Okay.
Such as Hitler's decision to allow hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers to escape at Dunkirk.
That was seen as a major blunder by many historians.
Exactly. But Hallett argues that it was a deliberate act of sabotage.
Okay.
Orchestrated by British intelligence to ensure that the war continued.
So he's suggesting that Hitler was intentionally undermining the German war effort.
That's his argument.
To help the British.
To help the British, yes.
Wow.
And he uses this, along with other examples,
okay,
to paint a picture of Hitler as a double agent.
Okay.
Working against his own side to further the British agenda.
He even suggests that Hitler's death was faked.
He does.
And he was spirited away to live out his days in hiding.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, albeit controversial theory.
It is. And Makow seems to find Hallett's work credible.
He does.
What are his main takeaways from it?
Well, he sees Hallett's work as further evidence that history is not what it seems.
Okay.
And that those in power are willing to use any means necessary,
right,
including deception and manipulation, to achieve their goals.
So he's saying that the official story, the history that we're taught in school,
right,
is not necessarily the truth.
That's right.
And that there are these hidden forces at play.
Exactly.
Shaping events in ways that we might not even be aware of.
That's what Makow is arguing.
He sees Hallett's claims about Hitler being a British agent as pointing to a deeper truth.
Right.
That the real power lies with the Illuminati, who control both sides of the conflict.
So that's right.
So it's not just about nations fighting each other.
No.
It's about this hidden force orchestrating the entire conflict for their own purposes.
Exactly.
That's a pretty disturbing thought.
It is.
And it seems like this idea of deception is central to how Makow sees the Illuminati operating.
It is.
He also claims that the Illuminati use false flag operations, where they stage attacks and make it look like another group is responsible to further their agenda.
Exactly.
We touched on this a little bit earlier.
We did.
But can you remind us, what are some of the events that he cites as potential false flag attacks?
Well, he mentions a number of historical events.
Okay.
Including the bombing of American establishments in Cairo in 1954.
Okay.
And the attack on the USS Liberty in 1967.
Right.
He even suggests that the 9/11 attacks might fall into this category.
Wow. So he's saying that these events, which often lead to war and social upheaval, are not random acts of violence. But carefully calculated moves in a much larger game.
Exactly. And the goal of this game, according to Makow, is to bring about a new world order.
A new world order.
A world government controlled by the Illuminati.
Wow, that's pretty ambitious.
It is, yeah.
He even mentions a specific group.
Yeah.
The Illuminati Grand Council.
The Illuminati Grand Council, yeah.
That supposedly sits at the top of this power structure.
Right.
Giving orders to figures like Churchill and Stalin.
Exactly.
Wow, so it's like this secret society within a secret society controlling the controller.
Exactly.
And he points to figures like Victor Rothschild as potential members of this council.
He does.
Claiming that they hold the true power.
Yeah.
Dictating the actions of even the most powerful world leaders.
That's right.
It's a very top-down view of power.
It is.
With the select few controlling the destiny of the many.
Right.
It's pretty daunting.
It is.
Makow also spends some time unpacking the claims made in Heinrich Müller's book, The Bank of England Funded the Rise of Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, it's a fascinating book.
Can you tell us a bit more about what he focuses on there?
Sure. Makow points to Müller's assertion that the Bank of England, through its connections to the Schroeder Bank, played a significant role in financing the rise of the Nazi Party.
So he's saying that the Illuminati, through their control of the global financial system, were actually funding the Nazis.
That's what he's suggesting.
Wow. But why would they want to support someone like Hitler, who is responsible for so much death and destruction?
Well, Makow argues that the Illuminati don't see things in terms of good and evil. They see war as a tool. A way to achieve their objectives. Regardless of the human cost.
So they're willing to sacrifice millions of lives to advance their own agenda.
That's what he's arguing.
That's a pretty cold-blooded calculation.
It is.
He also points to the role of appeasement, the policy adopted by Britain and France in the years leading up to World War II.
Yeah.
You know, this idea that if they just gave Hitler what he wanted, he would eventually be satisfied and there wouldn't be a war.
Exactly.
But Makow claims that appeasement was not a mistake, but a deliberate tactic.
To encourage Hitler's aggression. And create the conditions for a war that the Illuminati could then exploit.
So they were deliberately provoking Hitler into action.
That's what Makow argues.
Wow.
Yeah.
He claims that figures like Lord Halifax, who advocated for appeasement, were actually working for the Soviets.
That's right.
Manipulating Hitler into actions that would justify a war.
Exactly.
That's pretty devious.
It is.
So it's not just about manipulating events, it's about manipulating people, playing them against each other like pieces on a chessboard.
Exactly. Makow believes that the Illuminati are masters of deception and manipulation.
Yeah.
Using every tool at their disposal to achieve their goals.
Yeah. And he mentions a list of prominent British figures.
He does.
Who were allegedly Soviet assets.
Yeah, this list, which Makow claims was given to Müller by the Gestapo, includes bankers, politicians, journalists, and even members of the aristocracy.
Wow, so he's suggesting that the Illuminati had infiltrated the highest levels of British society.
That's his argument.
Using their agents to influence policy and shape events.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a pretty bold claim.
It is.
And it really highlights the extent to which Makow believes that the Illuminati
have infiltrated and corrupted institutions around the world.
And we see the same pattern in America as well.
Exactly.
He talks about how the American media was used to promote intervention in World War II. Even suggesting they used propaganda and biased reporting to sway public opinion.
Yeah, he sees this as part of a larger pattern. Where the Illuminati control the flow of information. Using the media to shape perceptions and manipulate the masses.
And it's not just the media. He also highlights the activities of various pro-war groups. Claiming they were actually fronts for British intelligence. Pushing for a war that benefited the Illuminati's agenda.
Yes. He argues that these groups, while seemingly advocating for noble causes, were actually tools used by the Illuminati to manipulate public opinion and pressure politicians into supporting the war effort.
So it's all about creating the illusion of popular support for policies that benefit the Illuminati.
Exactly.
He even talks about the role of William Stevenson. A Canadian intelligence operative who headed the British Security Coordination
They're all legacy.
in New York City. Wow, that was quite a journey through Henry Makow's world. We've covered a lot of ground, from World War II conspiracies to the alleged inner workings of the Illuminati.
He's been a wild ride, hasn't it? Through history and some very unconventional theories.
It's been intense, to say the least.
It has. What strikes me most is how Makow takes familiar historical events and figures and presents a completely different perspective on them.
Yeah.
Suggesting this hidden hand at play, you know?
Yeah, it's like he's saying, hey, what you learned in school, what you read in the history books, that's not the whole story.
Exactly.
He's asking us to question everything.
Yeah.
To look beyond the surface and consider the possibility that there's more going on than meets the eye.
Exactly. And he doesn't just focus on the past.
No.
He connects these historical events to current events and even future predictions.
Like that harvest of souls idea that Hidden Hand mentioned.
Right.
Pretty unsettling.
It is. And it really makes you think about the nature of power.
Yeah.
How it operates and how it can be used to manipulate and control whether you believe in the Illuminati or not.
Right.
The idea that powerful groups could be working behind the scenes to advance their own agenda is something worth considering.
Absolutely. Makow's work is a reminder to be aware of the potential for manipulation, to question the narratives we're given, and to be critical thinkers.
Absolutely.
But he doesn't just leave us with this bleak picture of a world controlled by shadowy forces.
Right.
He also talks about resistance.
He does.
About how we can fight back against this manipulation.
That's right. He offers a multifaceted approach, emphasizing individual action, spiritual growth, and building strong communities as key components of resistance.
Okay. Unpack that a bit more for us.
Sure. So he encourages individuals to become more self-reliant, to learn practical skills, to prepare for potential disruptions, and to reduce their dependence on systems that they believe are controlled by the Illuminati.
Okay, so it's about becoming less reliant on those in power and taking control of our own lives.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming our power and becoming more resilient in the face of whatever challenges may come.
He also emphasizes the importance of spiritual growth.
He does.
What does he mean by that?
He believes that the Illuminatis are engaged in a spiritual war against humanity, attempting to undermine our values and our connection to something greater than ourselves.
So resistance is not just about political or economic action.
No.
It's about strengthening our own spiritual foundation.
Exactly. He encourages people to reconnect with their faith. To find meaning and purpose in life beyond the materialistic values that he sees as being promoted by the Illuminati. And to live by a strong moral code.
So basically he's saying that we need to be strong in our beliefs and values to resist their attempts to manipulate us.
That's right. And he also emphasizes the importance of building strong communities.
Community,
He believes that communities are essential for resisting the Illuminati's attempts to atomize and control society.
So it's about connecting with others who share our values and working together to create a better world.
Exactly.
So it's not just about fighting against something. It's about building something new, something better.
That's a key part of his message. It's about creating a positive vision for the future and working together to make that vision a reality.
Well, this deep dive into Henry Makow's work has certainly been thought-provoking.
It has.
To say the least.
To say the least.
It's challenged us to look at the world in a new light.
Right.
To question the narratives we've been given. And to think critically about the forces that shape our lives.
It's a reminder that knowledge is power. And that by becoming aware of the potential for manipulation, we can become more resilient and better equipped to create the kind of world we want to live in.
Whether we agree with all of his conclusions or not, I think Makow's work serves as a valuable reminder to be vigilant, to question everything, and to never stop seeking the truth.
Well said. And remember, the future is not predetermined. We have the power to shape our own destiny, both individually and collectively.
Absolutely. This has been quite a deep dive.
It has.
Thanks for joining me on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious.